The doctors told Michael he was too sick to perform. His fever was dangerously high, and he was seeing things that weren't there. But when Michael heard 72,000 voices chanting his name outside Wembley Stadium, he made a decision that almost killed him and created magic. It was July 16, 1988. During his legendary Bad World Tour, the King of Pop was supposed to deliver the performance of a lifetime for his British fans. But in his suite at the Landmark Hotel, Michael Jackson was fighting a battle that had nothing to do with music. Michael was dying. For 3 days, Michael Jackson had been confined to his suite at the Landmark Hotel in London's Marylebone district. The King of Pop, who had electrified audiences across 4 continents during his Bad World Tour, was now fighting a fever that had spiked to 103 degrees Fahrenheit. Dr. Conrad Murray, his personal physician, had been monitoring him around the clock, administering IV fluids and antibiotics, while pleading with Michael to rest. But this wasn't just any ordinary illness. Michael was experiencing the complete physical and emotional breakdown that comes from months of relentless touring. The Bad Tour was the most ambitious concert series ever attempted. 123 shows across 15 countries, with production costs exceeding $10 million. Every night, Michael performed for crowds of 50,000 to 80,000 people, delivering 2.5 hours of perfect choreography, flawless vocals, and supernatural stage presence. The pressure was crushing him. Michael's perfectionist standards meant that every show had to be better than the last. Every moonwalk had to be smoother, every high note had to soar higher, every costume change had to happen in impossible time frames. His team had watched him rehearse the same sequence 50 times in a row, until his feet bled inside his signature sequin sock. "Michael, your body is shutting down," Dr. Murray warned, checking his blood pressure for the 4th time that afternoon. "Your immune system is compromised, your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and you're showing signs of severe dehydration. If you perform tonight, you could collapse in front of 72,000 people." But Michael wasn't listening to medical advice. He was listening to something else entirely. Through the fever-induced haze, through the exhaustion that made his bones ache, through the dizziness that forced him to grip the hotel room furniture just to stay upright, Michael could hear something that cut through his suffering like a knife through silk. Even 15 floors above the London streets, even through the thick glass windows of his luxury suite, the sound was unmistakable. His fans were singing. From the street below, a sound was rising that would change everything. The voices of thousands of people who had traveled from around the world, not just for a concert, but for him. They were gathering outside his hotel, and their voices were calling him back to life. What started as a small group of concerned fans outside the Landmark Hotel had grown into something unprecedented. Word had leaked that Michael was seriously ill and might cancel the show. Instead of demanding refunds or going home disappointed, thousands of fans from around the world had gathered in 2 locations, outside his hotel and at Wembley Stadium itself. At the hotel, they began an impromptu vigil. British fans mixed with Americans who had flown across the Atlantic. Japanese teenagers stood shoulder to shoulder with families from Germany, and die-hard followers from Australia sang alongside locals from London's East End. They weren't protesting or demanding anything. They were simply singing his songs back to him. "Heal the world, make it a better place," rose from the crowd in English, then switched to Japanese, then German, then Spanish. The melody of "Man in the Mirror" floated through the London evening air, sung by voices that had learned the words phonetically even when they didn't speak English. It was a global chorus of love, creating something that had never existed before, a multilingual prayer set to Michael Jackson's music. Meanwhile, at Wembley Stadium, 72,000 people who had been waiting for hours began their own demonstration of devotion. They weren't just an audience anymore. They had become a congregation. Stadium workers later said they had never seen anything like it. Tens of thousands of people holding candles, phone lights, and homemade signs reading, "We love you, Michael," in dozens of languages. Back in his hotel suite, Michael stumbled to the window and looked down at the crowd 15 floors below. Even through his fever-induced fog, he could see the sea of faces looking up, the flickering lights, and the gentle swaying of people lost in his music. The sound drifted up through the March evening air and into his room with crystalline clarity. "They came here for me," Michael whispered to Frank DeLeo, his manager, who had been watching him with growing concern. "They didn't come here for a show. They came here for me." The fever was still there. His head was still pounding, and his hands were still shaking. But something in his eyes had changed. Dr. Murray, who had been preparing to call Wembley Stadium and officially cancel both the rehearsal and the performance, watched in horror as Michael started moving toward his closet. "Michael, you can't be serious," Dr. Murray said, stepping between him and his performance clothes. "Doc," Michael said, his voice weak but determined, "those people down there are singing my songs because they love me. How can I not sing back?" Dr. Murray stepped closer, his face grave with concern. "Michael, you could collapse and die on that stage. Your fever is dangerously high, your blood pressure is erratic, and you're having episodes where you don't know where you are." It was true. For the past hour, Michael had been drifting in and out of fever-induced hallucinations. He had been having conversations with his mother Catherine, seeing her sitting in the hotel room's velvet armchair, encouraging him with that gentle voice he remembered from childhood. "Baby, those people need you," the vision of Catherine had whispered. "Sometimes we have to give everything we have." Even more disturbing to his team, Michael had been talking to his younger self, the 8-year-old boy from Gary, Indiana, who had first stepped onto a stage with the Jackson 5. "Don't you remember what it felt like?" he had asked the empty air. "When the music was everything? When performing was like breathing?" Frank DeLeo, his manager, tried a different approach. "Michael, think about your career. If something happens to you on that stage, it's over. Everything you've built, everything you've worked for." But Michael wasn't listening to logic anymore. The fever seemed to be stripping away his usual caution and revealing something raw and pure underneath. "I'm performing tonight," he said with finality that shocked everyone in the room. What followed was the most difficult pre-show preparation of Michael's career. His costume designer, Dennis Tompkins, had to help him into his iconic black leather jacket because Michael's hands were shaking too badly to work the zippers. His makeup artist kept having to stop and let Michael rest because he kept getting dizzy and nearly falling off the chair. The fever flush in his cheeks required extra layers of foundation, and his hairstylist had to work around the cold compress that Dr. Murray insisted Michael keep on his forehead. During vocal warm-ups, Michael's voice cracked repeatedly, and he had to sit down twice when the room started spinning. But the strangest part was Michael's mental state. Despite his physical weakness, there was something intensely focused about him now, as if the fever had burned away everything except his absolute commitment to his art. He wasn't preparing to put on a show, recalled his backup dancer Sheryl Crow years later. He was preparing to give his soul to those people. The journey to Wembley Stadium was about to begin. The journey from the Landmark Hotel to Wembley Stadium, normally a confident 30-minute ride, became a medical emergency in motion. Michael sat hunched in the back of his black Mercedes, wrapped in blankets despite the July heat, while Dr. Murray monitored his pulse every few minutes. Twice during the drive, they had to pull over so Michael could get fresh air when waves of nausea overtook him. At Wembley, the backstage area buzzed with nervous energy. Word had spread through the crew that something was seriously wrong with their star. The elevator ride to his dressing room became a nightmare. Michael's legs buckled halfway up, and he had to lean against the wall, breathing heavily. Security guard Bill Bray caught him just as he started to slide down. "I'm okay," Michael whispered, but everyone could see he wasn't. In his dressing room, Michael's famous pre-show rituals were falling apart. Usually, He would spend an hour in perfect silence, meditating and visualizing every moment of the performance. Tonight, he couldn't sit still for more than a few minutes without feeling dizzy. His usual obsessive attention to detail, checking every sequin, every glove finger, every microphone setting, was impossible when his hands shook and his vision blurred. His band members were terrified. Jennifer Batten, his lead guitarist, later recalled, "We could see Michael was in no condition to perform, but we also knew there was no talking him out of it. So we made a decision as a group. We were going to take care of him out there." The musicians and dancers huddled together, rapidly redesigning parts of the show. They simplified some of the more demanding choreography, planned to stay closer to Michael during dance sequences, and designated specific people to watch for signs that he might collapse. It was unprecedented. An entire production team modifying a multi-million-dollar show in real time to protect their vulnerable star. Then, at 8:47 p.m., it happened. The moment that changed everything. From beyond the stage walls came a sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of Wembley Stadium. 72,000 people erupting in unison. They had been waiting for nearly 2 hours, and their energy had built to an almost supernatural level. The roar wasn't just noise. It was pure love, transformed into sound waves. Michael, sitting on a folding chair in the wings, lifted his head. Despite his fever, despite his weakness, despite everything, he managed his famous smile. "They sound like heaven," he whispered to Frank DeLeo. The moment had come to step into the light. When Michael Jackson walked onto the Wembley Stadium stage at 8:52 p.m., 72,000 people immediately knew something was different. His usual confident glide was replaced by careful, deliberate steps. His skin glistened with fever sweat under the blazing stage lights, and his eyes had that bright, intense look that comes with high temperature. But when the crowd erupted in thunderous applause, Michael straightened up and flashed that megawatt smile that had captivated the world. "Good evening, London," he called into his headset microphone, his voice noticeably softer than usual. "You're going to have to help me out tonight." The opening number began with the familiar bass line that sent the stadium into hysteria. But something magical was happening. The fever seemed to be stripping away Michael's usual performance armor, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. Every movement was infused with an emotional intensity that nobody in that stadium had ever witnessed before. His backup dancers noticed it immediately. Lavelle Smith Jr. later said, "It was like Michael wasn't performing the songs, he was living them." The fever had burned away everything superficial about his stage presence. During the slower moments, when Michael transitioned into the more intimate songs, something extraordinary occurred. The hallucinations that had plagued him in his hotel room didn't stop when he reached the stage, they continued throughout the performance. But instead of fighting them, Michael seemed to incorporate them into his show in ways that created pure magic. When he performed the tender ballad about human connection, Michael began looking toward an empty section of the stage, his face lighting up with genuine joy. Those close to the stage could see him mouth the word "Mama" and blow a kiss toward the darkness. The audience, unaware of his fever-induced visions, thought he was acknowledging his mother's spiritual presence watching over the show. They responded with gentle applause and even deeper affection. About 45 minutes into the performance, during the high-energy crime thriller anthem, the inevitable happened. Michael's legs gave out slightly during a signature spin move, and he stumbled forward. For a split second, 72,000 hearts stopped. But Michael Jackson was still Michael Jackson. In an instant that showcased his legendary professionalism, he turned the stumble into an entirely new piece of choreography, a forward lean that became a dramatic pause, followed by a slow recovery that looked completely intentional. The crowd went wild, thinking they had witnessed a new innovation in his performance. His dancers quickly adapted, incorporating the modified movement into their routine as if it had been rehearsed for months. But the effort was taking its toll. As the performance moved into its second hour, Something was building inside Michael that would soon break open in the most vulnerable moment of his entire career. 1 hour and 20 minutes into the performance, as Michael approached his signature song about self-reflection and personal transformation, something broke open inside him. Whether it was the fever, the overwhelming emotion, or the sheer intensity of 72,000 people singing his words back to him, the king of pop reached his breaking point. As the opening piano notes began, Michael's voice cracked on the very first line. Not just a small vocal break, but a complete emotional collapse. He tried to continue, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, tears began streaming down his face, mixing with the fever sweat that had been glistening under the stage lights all evening. The audience didn't know what to do. They had never seen Michael Jackson this vulnerable, this human, this real. For a moment, Wembley Stadium fell into an eerie quiet, 72,000 people holding their collective breath. Then something beautiful happened. One voice from the crowd began singing the familiar words about making a change. Then another voice joined in. Then hundreds. Soon, all 72,000 people were singing Michael's song back to him, supporting him through his emotional breakdown, carrying him when he couldn't carry himself. Michael stood center stage, overwhelmed by the wall of sound coming from the audience. He wasn't performing anymore, he was being healed. The fever that had weakened his body seemed to be burning away every defense, every wall he had built around his heart, leaving only the pure essence of his connection to music and to people. "I love you all so much," he managed to say into his microphone, his voice barely above a whisper, but somehow audible throughout the entire stadium. Then, as if the crowd's energy was literally flowing into his body, something shifted. The fever was still there, the exhaustion was still real, but Michael found a reserve of strength he didn't know existed. The audience's love seemed to be healing him in real time. What happened next defied medical explanation. Michael began to move with more energy than he had shown all evening. The emotional release had unlocked something supernatural in his performance. His dancing became more fluid, his voice grew stronger, and his connection with the audience deepened to an almost spiritual level. It was as if the fever had stripped away his usual performance anxiety and revealed his purest artistic self, not the manufactured pop star, but the genuine soul who had been singing since childhood because music was as essential to him as breathing. The final act of the performance was about to begin, and Michael Jackson was no longer the sick man who had walked onto that stage 2 hours earlier. What followed was medically impossible and artistically transcendent. As Michael launched into his signature dance number about mistaken identity, something miraculous happened. Right there on stage, in front of 72,000 witnesses, his fever broke. You could see the exact moment it occurred. During his famous lean move, as Michael held that impossible angle that defied gravity, the glassy look in his eyes suddenly cleared. The flush in his cheeks faded, and his movements became more controlled and sustainable. Dr. Murray, watching from the wings, later said it was like witnessing a medical miracle in real time. The show that was supposed to last 90 minutes stretched to nearly 3 hours. Michael kept adding songs, telling stories, and connecting with the audience in ways that surprised even his longtime team. He brought dozens of children from the audience onto the stage, turning the massive arena into an intimate gathering. During his spiritual numbers, he transformed Wembley Stadium into a cathedral, leading 72,000 people in what felt like a healing ceremony. It was like Michael was trying to give us everything he had, recalled audience member Sarah Chen, who had traveled from Tokyo for the show. Not just his music, but his whole heart. You could feel that he was pouring his entire soul into that performance. The energy became supernatural. Michael's dancing reached new heights of precision and passion. His vocal range seemed to expand beyond its usual limits. Most remarkably, his connection with the audience transcended anything he had achieved before. He wasn't performing for them anymore, he was communing with them. During the gospel-influenced numbers, Michael turned the entire stadium into a church service, complete with call and response sequences that had grown men crying and children laughing with pure joy. When he performed his environmental anthem, 72,000 people swayed together like a forest in the wind, creating one of the most beautiful sights Wembley had ever hosted. As the performance finally wound down, Michael stood center stage, no longer the fevered, fragile man who had walked out 3 hours earlier. He was healed emotionally, physically, and spiritually. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael said into his microphone, his voice now strong and clear, "I want to thank you for something very special tonight. I came here sick in my body and sick in my heart. You healed both." The standing ovation lasted 23 minutes. People didn't want to leave. They had witnessed something that felt sacred, something that went far beyond entertainment. As Michael finally exited the stage, the real impact of this extraordinary night was just beginning to unfold. The next morning, Michael Jackson's temperature was completely normal. His blood work showed no sign of infection. Dr. Conrad Murray ran every test he could think of and found that Michael was completely healthy, as if the fever had never existed. "I've been practicing medicine for 25 years, Doctor," Murray said, "and I've never seen anything like it. It's like the fever just burned itself out through that performance." Medical experts who later studied the case suggested that the combination of physical exertion, emotional catharsis, and psychological healing created by the audience's support could have triggered Michael's immune system to overcome the infection. But for those who witnessed it firsthand, the explanation felt simpler. Love had healed him. For Michael personally, the July 16th concert was transformative. He discovered that his deepest, most vulnerable self was also his most powerful performing self. After that night, Michael approached his shows differently. He was less concerned with technical perfection and more focused on emotional authenticity. That fever concert taught him that audiences didn't want him to be superhuman, observed his longtime choreographer Vincent Patterson. They wanted him to be genuinely human. From that point forward, Michael let more of his real self show through in his performances. The entire concert was secretly recorded by multiple audience members, and the bootleg recordings became legendary among Michael Jackson fans worldwide. But it wasn't just the music that people treasured. It was the emotional journey, the vulnerability, and the healing that you could hear happening in real time. "You can literally hear Michael's soul being healed through that performance," said music historian Nelson George. "It's one of the most emotionally powerful recordings in pop music history." Today, the July 16, 1988 Wembley concert is considered one of Michael's greatest performances. Not because it was technically perfect, it wasn't, but because it was emotionally perfect. It proved that sometimes the most powerful art comes from our most vulnerable moments, and that healing can happen through authentic human connection. The story of Michael's fever concert reminds us that sometimes our greatest strength comes from admitting our greatest weakness. When Michael stopped trying to be invincible and allowed himself to be human, he became more powerful than ever before. For the 72,000 people who were there that night, they didn't just attend a concert. They participated in a healing ceremony. And perhaps that's the real magic of that evening in London. Not that Michael overcame his fever to perform, but that he allowed his vulnerability to reveal the transformative power of authentic connection between artist and audience.